Welcome! In today's music theory episode, let's explore the three main principles behind voice leading. Harmony is the art of combining notes to create chords and chord progressions. It's the vertical side of music, how you stack the notes on top of each other to create a harmony. On the other hand, how you transition between the chords, how you transition between all the notes within the chords to the next chord. That's the horizontal part of music, and that's voice leading. First out, let's talk about the three main voice leading principles. First, we have connected, which means we're going to use common tones or notes between the chords if available. The next one is gradual, so make sure we use either half steps or whole steps to make sure we have a gradual note transition. The third principle is smooth. Avoid greater leaps than, say, a third. Of course, there's more rules if you want to play by the book and write for classical orchestra, but to begin with, we can look for these three main principles, and we're going to have a quite good voice leading in our chord progressions. Okay, so let's apply these rules to a typical chord progression. So we're going to have 4 bars. So let's just divide our score to 4 bars. And in the first bar, we're going to have an A minor chord, which is the 6th chord in C major. Then we're going to have a D minor chord. Then we're going to have an F chord. And then after the F chord, we're going to have a C, and then a G. Our next step is to write down the note names of these chords. So for the A minor chord, we have A, C, and then the E. And D minor, we have, of course, the D, we have an F, and we have an A. And then for the F chord, we have F, we have an A, and we have a C. And for the C, we have the C, E, and the G. And then for the G, we have G, B, and a D. So our chord progression sounds like this, without any typical voice leading. The next step here is to put the actual notes here in our note sheet. So let's add the A minor chord. So we have the A note, and we have the C, and then we have the E. So that's the A minor chord in root position. And for this chord progression, we're also going to double the root 1 octave below as the bass. So we will have an A here at the bottom. Okay, so let's see if we can find any common notes here between the A minor and the D minor. So we have the A in both of these chords. So maybe we could use the A and transition to the A for the D minor chord. And then we have an E, which is a half note away from the F. So maybe that could also be a good transition. So we transition this E up to the F. And then this C will go to the D, because that's just a whole step. So that's a quite nice little transition. It's important to point out that these common guide rules or principles for voice leading doesn't really apply to the bass note. It's going to sound nice even though you have large leaps in the bass. So the bass can definitely go to the D up here without any issues or problems. Next up, the D minor to the F. Let's see if we can find any common notes. So we have the A in both of these. So the A can go to the A, and the F can go to the F between the chords, and then we have a D to a C. Yeah, it can fall back to the C like this. And then we're going to have an F here in the bass. Next up, the F to the C. Let's see, we have the C in both of these. And then we have an F, which could go to an E. That's just, again, a half step. So let's add those, the C to the C, like so. And then the F goes to the E. And then the A can go to the G. Let's move that down to the G. And then also add the C in the bass. And then our final voice leading transition from the C to the G chord. Maybe the C can go to the B, just a half step, so we take the C here to the B. And then the E can go to the D maybe. So let's go down to the D there. And then the G is a common note, so it's gonna be held like this. And then we need a G in the bass like this. Okay, so let's listen how this chord progression sounds with the voice leading. Sounds quite nice. Of course, it's gonna get a little bit more complicated if you have like 7 chords or 9 chords, or basically chords with more notes in them. But this is the main core principles to get going with voice leading. Now try this with your own chord progressions or any of the chord progressions we talked about earlier in the music theory course. And let me know how it turns out. See you in the next episode. Bye!